There is an old adage, one that you might have heard from a grandparent or village wise person, the one that says, you get out what you put in, meaning your efforts are matched to some degree by the results or the output. Now take our nonprofit, Pioneer Knowledge Services, who delivers this cool program that you're listening to right now, takes a bunch of effort that you don't even see. We hope that you obtain value from our efforts to deliver it to your powers of reason. Here is where you come in. You, the listeners. Make our efforts rewarded. Consider donating to keep us moving forward. Visit pioneer-ks.org and click on donate. The show you're about to experience serves twofold. First and foremost, this conversation design elicits knowledge from an experienced individual or expert. It is modeled on conversational theory and utilizes a protagonist, that's me, to crack in a deeper knowledge by vigorous discussion. Pioneer Knowledge Services has become adept in this practice and offers it as a service. Think of all those super smart people retiring. Ooh, scary. It is the best way to secure and transfer knowledge. The other piece of what this show provides is a self-help guide in leading a community group. It will aid anyone, as an example, to lead communities. Stan Garfield is a true leader in the field of knowledge management and has been a friend to Pioneer Knowledge Services for many years. Find him on LinkedIn and learn more about the systems integration and knowledge management leaders community. Stan Garfield, we have been here before. Today is a very interesting thing that we're going to talk about. Where are you on the planet, and what's the latest thing you've been doing?
So I am in Northville, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. It's about 20 minutes from Ann Arbor, about 30 minutes from downtown Detroit. And what I've been doing today is writing a little bit about how to cope with all the things going on in the world today and trying to help my friends and family feel at ease with unpleasant developments.
I hear what you're saying. Please send me a copy. I could use all the help I could get.
I'll be glad to.
Thank you. Have you ever lived overseas?
I've never lived overseas. I've been in this area of the country. Well, I've been a son of the Midwest for most of my life, with an exception of 6 years spent in New Jersey. But born in Illinois, lived in a couple of cities in Illinois, lived in Omaha, Nebraska, St. Louis, Missouri a couple times, and moved to Michigan in 1986. So this is the longest that I've lived anywhere in my life.
Yeah. What was the introduction to knowledge management that turned your eye and head to this whole field?
It's something that I probably was always doing most of my life. We certainly didn't have a name for it. But even as a kid, I liked to go up to the blackboard in the classroom and write little interesting facts or news items to share with my classmates. I liked to write little newspapers and write plays and pass things around in school. And then when I first discovered radio, that was something that really appealed to me. My friend and I started a radio station together in New Jersey back when we were in high school.
Nice.
I continued doing that when I moved to St. Louis. I did it when I was at school up in Northwestern. So the idea of communicating and being a journalist always appealed to me.
Yeah.
And I thought I was going to study journalism and become a journalist, but I got instead turned on to computer science my freshman year. And I switched from journalism to computer science and I graduated from Washington University with a degree in computer science. But I still had that journalist mindset. So I think combining the two has always been a good thing for being in the field of knowledge management. So when it finally came around to where I was spending a lot of my time sharing information with my coworkers at Digital, people recognized that. And when it's time to start a KM program in 1996, they turned to me and asked me to be the one to start it. So I've been doing it since then, which is now 28 years ago.
So you took me back to grade school, I presume, with the being the person that delivers the news, so to speak, to be the informer, to be the transformer of other people by giving them information and data. Who in your family set that experience for you that you thought, or is it just genetic?
Well, I don't know exactly. When I write about my parents, my father was a scholar, a professor of psychology. He wrote a number of books, so I think my book writing in part I owe to him. Okay. Mom was a reading specialist and imbued in me this love of reading, which I've always had. And she also, interestingly enough, when she was a student at Antioch College, she had the title of community manager.
Oh, Really?
way back in time. But so the
Wow.
fact that my parents had that in their background of reading and writing and whatever community management meant at that time probably had some influence on me along the way.
Do you have any example that is a memory of like there was an awareness in you that like you saw something, you experienced something, you went through something, and you're like, oh, I'm good at this. This is what I'm good at.
Well, I think when I started to write, especially I remember writing things that I would circulate at school when I was in high school in New Jersey, and people would read it and then they'd give me back positive feedback like this is funny or I'm enjoying this.
Like a newsletter? What do you mean? You just
No,
wrote?
I actually wrote satirical plays about the things that went on at school, and I think it was a way of getting some of my feelings and frustrations out. If I didn't care for how the teachers were teaching, I could satirize that in this comic play that I wrote. So I think getting feedback from that helped me. If people said, I don't want to read this, but they said, they wanted it. And so people would keep asking, let me see it, let me see it. And when I went on the air and started broadcasting, I got good feedback on that too. And people liked listening to me, especially I did play-by-play of the basketball team's games and got a lot of praise for that. I remember being at one game when I was a senior doing the broadcast of the game, and one of the cheerleaders came up and had headphones on next to me, was listening to my broadcast, and she told me, oh, you're really good. So if you hear that, that'll encourage you.
Yeah. It's an element of conversation that has such an interesting richness to it that there's no other way you could get to some of the data other than a conversation. So thank you and not that broadcasting is a conversation, but it's still this, you are challenging yourself to communicate well.
Yes.
All right. So let's step into the topic today. Back in 2005, you created an organization. Can you give me a little data about what it is and what it was for?
In 2005, I attended the APQC Knowledge Management Conference for the first time. It was actually held in St. Louis that year. It was mostly held in Houston thereafter, but it was held in St. Louis, which was my old hometown. And I was a presenter there. I think that's the first time that I was accepted to present at a KM conference. So that was a big deal. And as a presenter, I was asked if I would be willing to host a Birds of a Feather lunch session. And the idea behind this was there'd be a big round table. I'd put up a sign with a subject on it, and people who were interested in that subject would be encouraged to sit down at the table, and we'd get a quorum of people and have a conversation over lunch. So what I put up on the sign was consulting and systems integration, because that was the industry that I was in. And people filled up the table. We had a good conversation over lunch. And at the end of that conversation, I asked everyone at the table, would you like to continue this conversation? And they all said yes. And I said, let me get your business cards. And I created community. I didn't have a name for the community at the time, but the sign that said consulting and systems integration. And so actually, it was my friend Raj Dada created a Yahoo group for the community, and he called it SIKM, which stood for Systems Integration Knowledge Management, because that was the original industry focus. I began to solicit people when I got back from the conference to join the community, and I later realized that limiting it to a specific industry didn't make sense. It was of interest to anyone working in the field. When the community got created with that set of letters, SIKM, it really didn't apply. It was really just a global knowledge management community, but that term has stuck with us since then. And it's kind of funny because people will misread it and call it skim, or they'll pronounce it sikkim. Or if I say it quickly, when I say SIKM, they won't necessarily hear what I'm saying. In any case, it's just like APQC used to mean American Productivity and Quality Center, but they don't use that anymore. Same thing with SIKM. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a term that we've had for the past 19 years and people recognize.
So who came up with your logo?
The logo came from one of my team members at HP, Marcus Funke. I think he created it to use as a logo for our KM community when we were all at Hewlett-Packard together many years ago. So I used that as the logo for SIKM.
For the listener, what it is it looks like a bunch of stick people in a circle with their heads in the center of the circle, meaning we're bringing our heads together, I would be my interpretation. It's just a great graphic, so I wanted to hear about that. Well, the interesting thing is folks, we got together, Stan and I had a chat here a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about transfer of knowledge, making sure succession planning is all set, and all the parts and pieces of what that all means. And through our conversation, we were like, oh, you don't really have anything for everything you know and everything you've created with the SIKM. Maybe it's time to build a product. And then from that conversation, it was like, why don't we just do a podcast about that product and talk about the process? Because it is a useful tool to get into a behavior and a practice for anyone to be able to have a handoff packet to whoever's standing around, whoever's next if you're not there. It's a historical marker. It is a data process collector. It's a little bit of everything. Can you give me what you would define this product you created? It's about 4 pages in a Word doc.
Yeah, the origin of this stems from discussion we had during a presentation that I was jointly giving with Dinez Jerby and Patrick Lamb at the Knowledge Summit Dublin Conference. And during that session, which was on mentoring, Patrick raised the question of, SICAM is strongly identified with me as the leader. Some people think of it as my community. It's not my community, but I've been the creator and the leader of it. But the question was, what's next? What's the succession plan? If I suddenly disappeared, what would happen to it? Would it disappear also? I don't want it to disappear. I'd like it to continue on. So with that in mind, I raised the subject of, who's going to be the person who I can hand the reins to. And then in the discussion that we had, it became clear that I should probably try to document what I do. Typically, people like me will say, well, it's just not that much. I don't spend that much time. It's pretty easy. I could tell you in a few sentences, and it's kind of intuitive, but it's really more than that. So what I did was I took from many different articles that I had written in the past about this and distilled them into a document. I added some things that were missing. I went through a second rev, and today when looking at it, I realized I have to add some more things. So it's probably going to keep evolving, but it's pretty close, I think, to containing most of the concepts of what I do as a community leader, so that other people could take that up and carry it on.
So what do you think's missing? And folks, we're just talking to me, it's the who, what, where, when, how, why kind of collection, going back to your journalism mentality. It is trying to get all the parts of the puzzle on one spot to at least be a start point for somebody else.
Yeah, so today I was actually looking at some posts that were made today in the SICAM Leaders online discussion, and one of them was about knowledge retention. So this typically comes up a lot in the community. People will raise a question that we've actually discussed before, and they may or may not be aware of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It used to be there was a culture aspect of early communities that if you were to ask a question that had already been asked, you get slapped on the wrist because you didn't search first. But I never believed in that. I don't want to discourage anybody for asking a question. But what I want to do is I want to point them back to where we discussed it before, so they're not starting from scratch. So today, as I was doing that, what I do is I go in and I respond to the person. Now, the person who posted it had already gotten several good responses, but I responded with 2 links. One was to a specific thread that we had on this topic of offboarding, which is what the post was about. And secondly, to the hashtag knowledge retention, which goes to all of the threads we've had over the years on this subject, so that the original person could see, well, here's a thread that's very specific to what you've asked about. And then here are all the other ones that may be valuable to you as well. Now, I realized in doing that I hadn't included that aspect of monitoring and then making sure that you point people back to their previous threads. So that's something that I will add.
You're serving as a curator and a leader of a community and I hate to say the word agitator, but you keep things moving, right? There's a point where you can't just sit and watch everything just happen. You have to be a participant and give people shortcuts and help them. That's what your intent is.
Right. So one of the things that I think is very important for any community leader is to monitor the discussions, be aware of each thing that's being posted. Mm-hmm. You have to be on top of that. Then, in many cases, you really don't have to do anything further. If the community's responding and the person who started the discussion is getting value from the responses, good. Sometimes I may have something to add. I usually don't want to be the first voice to respond. I don't want it to make it feel like I'm a know-it-all and other people are discouraged from giving their answers. So I will wait for other people to respond. And after a while, if I have something to add, then I will. Sometimes I don't have anything to add and I'll just stay out of it. But the times that I'll really jump in are times where, in the case of today, where the thread's not the first one, and I want to make sure they realize we've discussed that before and take advantage of it. Yeah. And the other case is where there's no responses. So that's the thing you really guard against. After a few days, if somebody's asked a question and no one's answered it, then it's my duty to make sure that something happens. Now, there's several things that I can do. Mm-hmm. I can answer it myself. I can respond and say, hey, can anyone else in the community answer as a prompt?
As a prompt,
to kind of nudge them into doing it. And that often works. And there's other times where I might go offline, send a private message to someone who I think can answer this and see if they'll either go into the community and answer it there, or if not, send me an answer that I can post in reply. So those are the kinds of things that I can do to make sure that they do get a response. And so they're not just sitting there frustrated by the lack of an answer.
So what you just explained to me, is that covered in this document?
Yes, it's covered in the document, but it's also the part that I was going to add. So the idea of monitoring the discussions, making sure the answers get provided. But I'm going to add things specifically about, now, interestingly enough, I've written about all these things. I've written a book on community management, so it's all in there. I just haven't pulled out that part, made it specific to this document yet.
One point in here that I kind of caught my eye, that you keep an eye on hashtags. And if you only find one hashtag, it seems to be a point to pull it out of there. Is that right?
The hashtags in the community are something that I curate. And probably most hashtags that we need have already been created. There's always the chance that we could need some new ones. I'm not ruling that out. Okay. But what sometimes happens is I would describe it as some people get hashtag happy.
Yes.
And they'll post lots and lots of hashtags. And in social media, that's almost a way of communicating and expressing. But in knowledge management, not so much, right? It should be a different function, which is to tie together all the related threads. But if you introduce a new hashtag, which is a variant of one we already have, that actually works against the purpose.
Yeah.
Because instead of pulling them together, you now have redundant hashtags. So as a hashtag curator, I'll make sure two things. Number one, and this is the most common scenario, people post with no hashtag. That's the most common. In which case, I will add one to their thread. All right, I'll just make sure that it's tagged so it can be found with other related threads. And the other case is they add hashtags which we didn't have, and then I'll look at it and see, is that one we should be adding? If so, fine. If not, can I use a different one that we've already used? All right, so that's kind of what I'm doing. But if they create sort of a one-off hashtag that I doubt will ever be used again, that's the case you're asking about. Then in that case, I'll remove that hashtag because I don't think it's helping or adding value. But it's a subjective thing. But mostly, we have enough hashtags already. So like today, when they talk about knowledge retention, we have that hashtag, right? So what I want to make sure they don't create a new hashtag slightly different
or misspelled, right?
Or misspelled, right. Yeah.
So let's talk about hashtags, because I find them very peculiar, because it seems to me, wild guess here, maybe 70% of the population does not ever use them. Do you see that as kind of where would you guess the majority of the folks are? Are they using them or they're not using them?
I think your 70% is probably pretty good. So the 70% that don't, I add a hashtag. And by the way, I don't have any problem with that. It's not like I would go on the warpath and say, you must add S. No, I'll add it. And that way I can ensure they don't add a misspelled one, right? So it's probably a net positive. The flip side, the other 30% include, we've even had several instances where there's no subject at all in the post, just a string of hashtags. Well, that's not good. It doesn't really explain what this post is about using, the normal sentence structure. So in that case, I'll add a subject that tries to explain it to the community and then maybe reduce the number of hashtags down to the ones that are essential.
What has changed? Let's talk about from 2005. It looks like the big muscle movements of this organization are the listserv or the forum and monthly calls, and something new that has been added recently.
Something new that's been added is?
The mentoring piece.
So the mentoring program was created last year, and Nines Jerby took the lead on that in conjunction with Patrick Lamb. And I participated in the initial version, and it's done in conjunction with another community, KM4Dev. Between the two communities, Nines has solicited both volunteers to be mentors and to be mentees. So I believe it's a good program. We've actually added a subgroup in our online community for that specific program so that the mentees have their own communication channel. But for general sharing, I discourage that. I don't want them, asking questions there that could have been asked to a larger community. But if they need to communicate just about the mentoring program, that's appropriate. So that program exists as a sub-program underneath SIKM. But normally it's promoted within the SIKM community and within KM4Dev. So that's an example of a program which we've added. As you mentioned, the online discussions, that's the number one thing that we do. Yeah. And the number two thing is our monthly calls. We've had a monthly call every month since we started. So I'm proud of that. It's an hour long. It's always on the same day of the month with occasional exceptions.
Okay.
But normally it's the third Tuesday of the month. It's at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, which allows there to be West Coast participation in the U.S. It allows there to be afternoon participation in Europe. It's not ideal for Asia. So every once in a while, when we have a speaker from Australia, then we'll have a call at a different time to accommodate that.
Would you term all this activity in the common phrase of a community of practice?
Yes, I would say it's a community of practice. The people in it are practicing knowledge management, and they're brought together for their common passion for that subject. We have people who are long-term veterans who use it as a way of helping others. We have lots and lots of newcomers to the field who are using it to learn. And we have a lot of people in between that both learn and contribute.
Where do you see it going in 20 years?
I would imagine that it'll keep on as it has. It's been going almost for 20 years, so I have no reason to believe that that won't continue. People have often proposed that knowledge management is dead or dying. I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
I think it's always going to be needed. So if it's always going to be needed, why is it going to be dead? It goes through cycles,
Yes.
right? In every company I've been at, there's a cycle of enthusiasm and then abandonment, but it always comes back because the need never goes away.
It never goes away because we're talking about people and behaviors.
Right.
Well, let's go back to community of practice. Can you explain to people what you and I know, but I want the listener to get a fuller understanding of why anybody, any organization, would consider creating a community of practice?
The reason that communities exist is that organizations typically have boundaries within them. They have organizational silos based on org charts and structures, and those often are resistant to communication across those boundaries. Fundamental purpose of a community is to cut across those boundaries and to allow everyone in an organization, regardless of which structure they're under, to come together in their shared interests so they can learn together. So if you're in a very structured environment where you only report under this vertical structure and you never communicate with anyone in a different structure, community is designed to try to cut across those so that people who have the same interest but would otherwise never know one another, never interact, never work together, can become aware of each other through the community. And the beauty of it is if you get everyone in an organization who shares the same interests in the community, then you can guarantee that there's a way for information and knowledge to flow across those boundaries. We call that boundary spanning. And that's really one of the fundamental roles of it. But above that, it's people volunteering to join. They're not forced to join. In fact, if you're forced to join a community, that doesn't work. But if you join voluntarily and you put forth the energy at least to pay attention to what the community is discussing, then you get something out of it. You learn, you have resources you can count on, you have problems to solve, you have people to help you solve them. And it's often people that you don't know. Typically, people will start with people they know to solve a problem. And if I turn to the person sitting next to me and they don't have the answer, I can throw up my hands. But in the community, I can go to the community and pose that problem. And someone somewhere in the world that I may never have heard of before will come back with an answer. And that's the power of community.
The interesting thing is that I think most people have a misconception that if an organization, a company, a firm wants to create a community practice, that it has to be work-related.
Well, one of the distinctions you can use is that you can call the other thing a community of interest. A community of practice typically revolves around work-related topics, things that we're practicing because they're part of our work. A community of interest is something that may not be work-related, but that we still share a passion for. I've always advocated that they should both be supported by any organization, both types, even things that are not at all work-related.
Yeah.
Why should you do that? Why, wouldn't that be wasting time at work and wasting resources? Well, the answer is, if you get people active in communities of interest, let's say you have a runner's community, then they get used to using communities for that. And then when you ask them to use them for work-related topics, they're already accustomed to it and they can use the tools. So it transfers very nicely. So if you encourage both communities of interest and communities of practice side by side, the benefit is that people will fundamentally be comfortable with using communities for both purposes.
I like the side by side because you're dealing with people and then organizational structures and purpose in the same stroke of the brush. And it would be a great rollout to have them in tandem. In my aspect of the community of interest, it adds so much value of connection, of community building, of understanding other parts, just all those things that are really incidental to the organization. It's not like the organization wants this to happen because X is going to be a product. It enriches the work culture because people have to have some trust in order to communicate in an authentic way. And these types of activities build that practice.
That's right. By building that trust and trusting in the idea of community and the idea of connecting with your fellow peers across your organization who share an interest, that's very similar then to how community of practice works. So you'll feel that you can trust that as well. So I think the other thing is if someone's used to leading a community of interest, then that skill transfers nicely. So if they lead a community of practice, they already kind of know what to do, and that's useful. And then the other thing is it's probably good for the company, right? The company who has communities of interest probably helps retain employees because they feel good. But my interest is actually, there's an outlet for it here. I can meet other runners or other music lovers or other photographers. These are my hobbies, but the community that exists is being supported by the company I work for. That's a good thing. I enjoy that, and I'll stay here.
What would be your top 3 things to nurture a young organization or old that is listening and saying, boy, we really should try that? What would be the 3 things they'd really need to look at?
Well, as communities grow, this gets to be more and more of a need. When you're a small fledgling company and you can all sit in one room, then you probably can be aware of what everybody else is doing. And if you have to ask something, you just turn across the room. That's a case where a community doesn't have to be that formal. But as soon as you get bigger than that, which most companies aspire to, and they have different offices and they keep growing, then it becomes more and more necessary. And when it gets to be a giant global corporation with hundreds of thousands of employees, it's almost guaranteed that you won't know what the rest of the organization knows. You won't know what they've done. You won't know the people. You won't be able to take advantage of what they've already done. And communities allow you to do that because it tends to break down the giant organization into the subcomponents of the things that are important. So what I think you want to have one community. By the way, you want to have exactly one, not more than one, but one community for each important topic to the organization. If you have more than one, you have the problem of redundancy, where you don't know which community to join and you splinter the knowledge into different silos. But if you have one community, that's desirable, and they want to have one for each important topic. You don't want to be missing one, right? So if I'm a project manager, I want there to be a project management community. And if I'm an engineer, I want there to be an engineer community, right? But you figure this out. You go, what's important? Maybe depending on the size of your company, that could be 10 topics, it could be 30, it's going to vary. But however many there are, if you create a community for each one and you encourage all of your employees to join the one that's most relevant to their work, then you can get this, what I call the promise that you can make to them is, if you need anything, or if you have a problem to solve, or you have a question to ask, or you have a resource you're looking for, go to the community for that topic, pose your need there, and you will get what you need. And that's a pretty powerful promise to be able to make.
Organizationally, how would you suggest these folks that are going to start this for the first time, how do they get provability on return of investment, a measurement? What do you measure that makes any difference to the C-suite of why are we doing this?
Well, in general, that question of ROI for all of knowledge management is a little bit of a red herring because you can't really prove anything like that because there's too many variables. What I say is communities lend themselves to being able to answer the question, what's the value of the community? Because the value is demonstrated by the daily activities in the community. So each time someone posts a question and gets an answer, and then they respond back by saying, thanks, that was really helpful, that's proof of the value of the community. And you can collect all those instances and then show anyone who is a skeptic and say, you're wondering about a community, let me show you these 100 examples of our actual employees getting actual help and thanking the person who helped them. By the way, can you do that for any other investment? You can't prove it as readily as you can with a community. So to me, you can answer the question. You just can't do a numerical computation, right?
You can get numeric in the number of memberships or the number of posts or the number of responses, those types of things. But do they really mean a whole lot? Because, again, we're getting to the value of transfer of whatever that data was or information that may have changed somebody's decision metric or execution of trying to do something or. I love the opportunity when I tell people that looking for a way to figure out how to do something. I'd bought a new John Deere tractor. It had a front end snow blower. I look at the manual and I'm like, oh my good gosh, I am going to go berserk trying to figure out these stupid images. I just searched and there was a YouTube video. So I just want to tell this because as a knowledge person and somebody that's, worked around the field of developing knowledge products, training products for the military, all those sorts of things, you try to get to whatever's the easiest way to get it to the person. I found a video of a dude that didn't say anything. There was no audio. There was no text. It just was a recording of him going through the steps of putting this thing on, and it was enough. It was about a 5-minute video. Play it, and then I do that. And it becomes a mimicking. There's not any barrier. I can just visually see it and then do it. And I think a lot of people overcomplicate items like the product you just created, which is the essence of what the role is you do for SIKM. How do you keep it simple? What's your advice of just keep it simple?
Well, I think keeping it simple is real important. I just want to piggyback on your example there. In general, whenever I ever have to find out the answer about how to solve a problem, what I found over many years is it's much more likely that I'll find it by doing a search over the internet, and I'll probably find some equivalent of a community, right? An online forum, a bulletin board, a Reddit, whatever I'm going to find where it's been solved, and I get my helpful answer. It's much more likely that I'll find it there than I will in the company's online support database, right? So I think that's another proof of community over, as you're saying, the manual. So I can go to their support forum and I can look for it and I'll search it and I won't find it. Some discussion forum that answered that question, right? So that's another proof of the value of communities. And the good news is those are online and we can search for them and find them.
That's a great example of using that as a use case to show value because that's a simple way to do it. I totally get that.
So as far as keeping it simple goes, the answer to the simple is if you answer questions in real time versus trying to anticipate all of them and creating some very vast knowledge base, that's simpler, right? Because instead of saying, let me try to write everything down and make it searchable and findable and still no one will ever use it, let's just wait till the moment of need happens. And then if there is something I can point to, I'll point right to the specific part rather than say, read the document. I'll say, look at this passage or I've pulled it out and this is the one that applies. So humans helping each other is simpler than giant databases. And if you think about the earliest days of knowledge management, which were primarily devoted to trying to collect documents and put them in repositories, the idea was if we collect everything, then we can find everything. And that didn't work. What works better was the next phase, which was let's connect people together. And if I articulate a need to you in real time, then you can come back to me and say, here. But I don't have to ask you to write down all your knowledge in advance. I only ask you to respond at the actual time of need. And that's simpler than the other approach. Let's just talk a little bit about what the steps are that I outlined in that document.
Okay.
First of all, it starts with membership. So when I do my job as leader of the community, one of them is to approve membership. Members have to request membership. They can't join automatically. And we have a requirement that I know who they are. There are no anonymous members. You can't join using your screen name. You have to say who you are. And so the question is, well, why? Why should that be necessary? Well, we want to have a supportive community culture. And if you have people whose names aren't known, then that could lead to them doing things that are undesirable. So I want people to stand behind, if they say something, I want to know who they are. And if they answer a question, I want to know who they are. So you have to identify yourself. That's the first thing, starting with membership. Then the next thing I mentioned is this culture, a positive culture. And we've had one in SIKM. It's nurturing. We don't have people, trying to demean one another or being harsh with them. If I were to detect that, that would be a case where I would intervene. I would coach them privately and say, hey, Edwin, be a little kinder and gentler in your response. And if you took the advice, great. But if not, if you persisted, I might tell you that you have to leave the community. So there's that aspect of kind of maintaining the culture of the community. You already mentioned the role of curation. That's a big part of what I do as well. Making sure that threads that belong together are kept together. If someone starts a new thread but really belongs to another one, I can merge it into it. If they respond to a thread with a new one by mistake, I can split it off. And doing all of that and adding the hashtags and keeping the titles informative is part of making the history of all the discussions useful, right? So by doing that, it's easier for people to go back and use all of our 19 years worth of discussions. And that's a big role that I play. So then there's the whole monthly calls that we do. And there's a little work that goes on with that. I schedule the call. So I'll send a note to people and I'll say, would you be willing to be the speaker? And we usually are running about a year in advance. All right, I'll say, will you be willing to speak? And if they say yes, then I'll add them to the schedule. And then I'll send them a reminder the month before and the week before. He'll send me his slides the day before. I'll put them in my OneDrive. I'll share the link with all the people so that they have it. And then the day of the call, I'll initiate the call using freeconferencecall.com. It's very simple technology. It's audio and slides. We don't have anything more complicated. And the idea behind that is nothing should go wrong. We should have calls that run without technical problems. And we've been pretty lucky with that. I record the calls, start recording, end recording. And as soon as we're done, the recording's available. I don't have to do any work. That's nice. And we send out a summary right afterwards, which says, here's the link to the recording. I copy the chat transcript and put that out. So we have then a recording of each one of our calls. Between the online discussions and monitoring and curating those, dealing with membership, dealing with occasionally I have to go and bouncing, and I got to go fix that. Or are they trying not to get any mail from us? I say, no, you got to get mail from us. We want you to pay attention. We don't want you to be a join-only member and not be active. So there's some ongoing maintenance that I do in the community. But I think I've pretty much covered most of what goes on in my role as leader.
So your head marketer, your head programmer or project management, your curation, and you're the cheerleader. And I hear a bit of being a combo between a gardener and a policeman, because you're playing both roles to nurture the community, but then police it to make sure the rules or the agreements are kept.
That's right.
And people are safe.
There's aspects of both there. Try to spend more time on the nurturing and less time on the policing. But the policing should be understood that it's there so that we don't get out of control. I've been in other communities in the past that seemed like they were harsher and that people felt intimidated at times, and we definitely don't want that.
Or they get filled up with spam. It's like, who's monitoring this group? It's horrible.
Well, right. If you had a group where anybody can join, which is true of some online groups, then that's what you end up with. That's another reason to know who people are, because if they post something that's wrong, you can go right to them and say, hey, don't do that.
Well, everything we've talked about in building a community, I think, is timely in a lot of ways. Do you have an example of either a good community from your history, other than this, work-related or not, or a bad community?
Sure.
You don't have to name names, but what was it about that made it good or bad?
I'll give you a couple of stories. At one company that I worked at, we had a knowledge management community that was a closed group. It was only designed to be for the people that worked in the KM organization. And I argued that that was wrong and that it should be opened up, including anyone in the company who was interested, because that would be a good thing. Oftentimes there's an irrational fear that if we open it up, we're going to be discussing about something confidential and some outsider will become aware. And I asked, well, what would that be? We're not going to deal with confidential personnel matters in the community. That's going to be done through email. So why would this be a problem? So eventually I was able to persuade powers that be to change it from closed to open. And what was interesting is when it was closed, it had 200 members. When we opened it up in a relatively short time, it grew to 2,000 members.
Oh.
That's a proof of the value of openness, which communities should be open, right? They should be open to the world. As an example of that, SIKM, even if you don't join it, all of our online discussions are open for anyone to read, right? You don't have to join to read. You have to join if you want to post, but if you want to read, it's open. So that, to me, that's what knowledge management is supposed to be about. We should be practicing that. So that would be an example where we went from bad to good. A bad community is one, I think, that tries to enforce rules that really ultimately don't make sense. I'll give you an example. I was a member of a community of community management people, and I would occasionally share in there. If I had written a new article about community management, I would share a link to it. I'd say, all right, you're all interested in community management. I've written this article about whatever. Here's a link to it. And then people came back and said, no, this violates the community rule. We don't want self-promotion in the community. They viewed it as spam. And my argument was, well, yeah, I'm against spam, but do you consider what I just shared to be spam? Can't you use some judgment? Yeah. If it was just me endlessly promoting myself, then I should be slapped on the wrist.
Right.
But if I'm sharing an article that's freely available, that's relevant to this community. How are you not wanting that to happen? So I eventually, of course, stopped participating. You can discourage knowledge sharing rather easily through enforcing silly policies like that.
I think the key essence of it, just like a good conversation, the key essence is creativity. You're giving an opportunity to be creative to a degree in a form of language that is around problem solving or looking for help or support or whatever, a shortcut to something. And that is a reflection, I think, of most people's experience of being raised in a family or a community or something like that. You've got people in a support mechanism to some degree, not everybody, but I think in general, people grow up with people they can count on. And what you're doing is you're duplicating this essence of support and people that you can count on in a formal way of building a community of either interest or practice.
One thing that happens pretty often is I get private emails or LinkedIn messages that are asking me some question. This happens pretty often. And my typical response to them is, I'd be glad to answer you, but I want you to post this into the community. And there's two main reasons I do that. One, there will be other people who will respond, not just me, and you'll get a better set of answers. Yeah. Number two, there'll be other people who will benefit from reading what we're discussing. That's what we're trying to advocate as knowledge managers. Therefore, we should do that. It's interesting, though, how often we as knowledge managers do not practice what we preach. We're trying to stimulate collaboration. But let me just ask you privately, and I'll try to say to them, don't you want to model the behavior that you're trying to get adopted in your organization? And so I'll push them back, and sometimes they'll post the community, and sometimes they won't. But the idea is I kind of relentlessly, let's apply knowledge management. And there's nothing intimidating or harmful. If you pose your question, no one's going to come down on you. No one's going to call you ignorant. Right. By the way, when I answer them, I always start by thanking them for the post. That's always my first line. Thank you for posting. Here's what I have to say, and then other people usually respond. So hopefully they see that works out better than if I just gave them an answer.
Folks, what he's talking about is the concept of one-to-one versus one-to-many. And that is such a simple process, but it's a practice you have to kind of get around because you want to make that reusable and more touchable content. You don't want to have it between two people because it becomes a dead poet kind of thing. Person to person, it doesn't affect a whole lot of people. And I think there's probably a little bit of fear in folks about stepping into a community. I bet you there's 3 times I have misspelled stuff that I've put in the SIKM because that's the way I work. And people are like, hey, you misspelled that. Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah. Well, you got what I was saying. So, and I think there's a fear in some people to not do that, to not put themselves out there.
I think it's actually in most people, right? Because we have a rule of thumb that says that 10% is the number of any community that will ever post, and 90% will never post. Therefore, why is that? Well, I think a variety of reasons, but 90% of the community members either are slightly afraid of what will happen, or they doubt themselves. They don't think what they have to say is worthwhile. They don't stack up compared to these other gurus and so forth.
Who am I, right? Yeah. Right? Who am I to say anything?
And some people try to overcome that, and I tell them you can't overcome that. That is a law of nature, and you don't even need to try to overcome it. Just try to get your community large enough so that 10% is a meaningful number, right?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Stan. This has been an exquisite conversation. I appreciate the efforts to, share your story of the SIKM and this most recent product you created to transfer your tacit knowledge.
Well, you're welcome, Evan. It's always fun talking with you.
Any last tidbits you wish you would have said?
I think we got through the things in the document. Now I'm going to add a little bit more to it, so that's a good thing.
We're making it more better.
Thank you for listening to Because You Need to Know, the reference podcast in knowledge management. My name is Soni Toneme. As an art administrator, Because You Need to Know has been my go-to podcast and has helped me hone my management skills. Please consider sponsoring the podcast with your business.
Thank you for joining this extraordinary journey, and we hope the experiences gained add value to you and yours. See you next time at Because You Need to Know. If you'd like to contact us, please email byntk@ pioneer-ks.org or find us on LinkedIn.